the week there have been bootcamp courses on other topics to prep for the certification exam, and this one's going to be focused mostly on email marketing with a few other additions. I have my Pardot.org up right here. Most of what I'll be talking through is in this slide deck just to make it easier for you to study after the fact. But if you have any questions or if you'd like to see something demoed live, I do have my Pardot.org up and I'm happy to walk through that. So just feel free to drop questions in the chat or unmute and interrupt me, and I'm happy to do a deeper dive if something isn't clear. All right, so let's dive into it. Quick background. So my company's called Sercante, and our mission is to help marketers be successful on the Salesforce platform. So we do a lot of work with Pardot, but also Sales Cloud, Marketing Cloud, and other parts of a company's MarTech stack. I also have a blog called The Spot for Pardot, which is a brand that more people recognize than Sercante. But our team is fully remote. I'm based in Atlanta, Georgia, but five folks in the UK, 2 in Canada, and the rest sprinkled across the US. Our Twitter handles are right here if you feel compelled. Oh, now I covered them up. At Spot for Pardot and at Sercante LLC if you feel compelled to share any insights that you're getting from today's session or any content. A little bit about my background. I've worked with Pardot and Salesforce for the last 10 years. First as a client-side marketer, and then for the last 5 as a certified consultant. So this is a screenshot of the exam outline and some of the topics that are covered under the email marketing section of the exam. This is worth 20% of the overall exam credit, so definitely something to have a really strong foundation in. So we're going to walk through things that are covered in these 3 bullet points, but also some additional things related to email marketing that I think you can expect to be on the specialist exam. Oops. And then a couple of other topics. So email authentication, we're going to dive into completion actions. That one kind of crosses over between automation and email marketing, and then also talking about the process of managing lists, which kind of intersects with a lot of these different areas. So first, let's talk about email authentication and domain management. And before we talk about the what of how you do this in the system, the why of kind of the steps that need to take place for email authentication is the emails that are going out through Pardot are going out through Pardot servers. So there are some steps that admins need to take in order to basically authorize Pardot to send emails on their domain's behalf and make sure that those are getting delivered through to customers. Another kind of key use case is in delivering to internal users. Going through these authentication steps helps make sure that they make it through spam filters and don't get flagged as suspicious mail. So in Pardot, there's a section called domain management where you can set up your email sending domains. Any email address that you're looking to send emails from in Pardot, the domain should be set up here. So at my company, we send emails both from Sercante and the Spot for Pardot email address. If we were attempting to send from anything else, like at salesforce.com or at whatever additional domain, we'd have to go through this setup process to make sure that those get delivered successfully. So the different sender frameworks that Pardot supports. So DKIM, it's domain keys identified mail is what that stands for, but it's designed to detect forged sender addresses in emails basically. So looking to see if the domain that's being sent from matches the server that it's being sent from. And then SPF, Sender Policy Framework, is a similar authentication method. And the technical nitty-gritty of how this is set up is not something that you need to know for the exam, but you would definitely need to know that like these are the 2 methods that are used and where to go look for those in Pardot. When everything is successfully set up, you can click this little check DNS entries here. And if it's set up correctly, it will check this as verified. If it's not returning the values that Pardot expects, you'll see a little red error message there. And if you are running into any kind of deliverability issues, this is where I'd recommend starting first. I've also included just a little link. I think this little hover bar is going to show up every time I try to hover over the bottom links, but on some of these slides, I've included links to additional documentation or blogs that would be helpful when studying for the exam. So basically, once you have these domains set up, you can export a set of values that need to be added to your DNS record. So wherever the hosting for your website or your email server is, setting it up at that level. It does take about 24 hours after you set it up on the DNS side to show a successful result in Pardot. But again, this little check DNS entries thing is what allows you to verify that. The other domain management thing that you may have covered in another session, but is managed in that same section of Pardot, is setting up a vanity domain, also known as a CNAME or a tracker domain. And so basically when Pardot is sending emails, it's rewriting all of the links in those so that it can track those back to a specific prospect. And by default, it uses go.pardot.com to rewrite all of those links. A lot of companies want to make the experience a little more branded and seamless, like a marketing function. So like creating a one that goes off of your primary domain, like go.sercante.com or info.sercante.com, just helps make that experience a little bit more seamless for users. The most important thing to know here is just that like getting this set up is a step to enhance that branded experience, and also that you can enable HTTPS directly from Pardot. The how-tos I think are a little bit less relevant, but those are the key things to know. I'm gonna keep going. All right, so some practice questions that you could expect to be on the certification exam. So what is a CNAME? I guess we don't really have a way of you guys weighing in on these through Zoom, but maybe just read through the answers and like think about which you would pick. And then the second question, which types of email authentication are supported by Pardot? SPF, DKIM, and DMARC, or SPF and DKIM. And the answers to these are C for number 1 and D for number 2. All right, so let's dive into the bulk of email marketing, and included a ton of links to do further research and reading if you'd like to follow on with some of this, and then also some links to details about preference management and email reporting. But one of the kind of the foundational things to know about email marketing in Pardot is that there are 2 basic types of emails. List emails, which are created for one-off, one-time sends, and email templates, which are used in all automations, all autoresponders, engagement studio programs, and can also be used as kind of like a starting point for creating a list email. So for example, if you had a newsletter that you send out every month, you'd have a newsletter template, and then you'd send a list email on a monthly basis using that template. Pardot has roughly 30 email templates that are available out of the box for new customers. 6 of those are mobile responsive, and because so many users are opening emails on mobile devices, oops, sorry, let me go back here. I would highly recommend using one of those as a starting place. I see a question here in the chat about can we, oops, every time I click on the chat, I keep advancing my slide. Hold on, there we go. Question is, can we not modify or reuse list emails to send emails in the future? So yeah, once a list email is sent, you can't go back and change it. But what you can do is you can save a copy of that and then make modifications and send it as another list email. So that's a behavior that we see happen a lot with things like newsletters, where instead of just using the actual template, the marketer will go to the list email, save a copy, and edit the things that need to change for that month? That's a great question. All right. So a couple of additional features of list emails. So Pardot can send what's called operational emails, which is essentially a tool for non-marketing messages that can bypass the opted out setting. So like if you're sending something like a shipping confirmation or an update to your terms of service or something like that, those can be sent as operational emails, and that's available for list emails only. A/B testing. So A/B testing is when you send two versions of an email to see which, in testing either like a subject line or an image or something, and then Pardot will pick a winner and send the remaining balance of the emails to whichever version performed the best. And this feature is only available for list emails as well. To dive in a little, oops, sorry. I'm gonna move this chat. There we go. All right, full screen. A little bit of a deeper dive on A/B testing. So this is what the interface looks like when you're setting up your A/B test. I would recommend like building the email 100% before turning this on, because what it basically does is it creates a duplicate version of that email for the B variation. And then you can make the whatever modifications you want to test in the second email. And then when you're configuring the test itself, you can choose the time frame for how much time before Pardot selects a winner, the criteria that you evaluate the winner by, so opens or clicks. If you're testing something like a subject line or pre-header text or who the email is sent from, I would generally recommend using opens because that's all they have visibility to before the user opens it. If you're testing like colors, images, call to actions, clicks is the better metric because that's the action that people are taking after they have visibility to what you're testing. And then selecting the percentage of your audience that you want to use for testing. So you can do between 25, and I think the max is 75%. But so basically this percentage of the audience would get the email as soon as you send the list. Pardot would wait and see kind of what happened over the time period that you specified. And then for the remainder of the prospects on the list, it would send the winning version to those. A question in the chat, what are some of the different combinations that you can make when doing A/B testing? So A/B testing is, marketers love to play with it, but it's really hard to do well. A few recommendations for how to design tests that work well is to test only one thing per email, because if you create two versions of the email and then you change the subject line, the image, the button in version B, and then B wins, it's really hard to know what change was the thing that made the difference. So testing one thing at a time. A list of things I would say are common to test are subject line, pre-header text, email sender, so who the email is being sent from, images, headlines, button copy, or just text variations overall. What happens if there's a tie? That's a great question. There's almost never an exact tie. And if there is, it's sort of like a moot point of who gets what version of the email. But the A version is what gets sent if there's an exact tie. And then there's a question here about what the list reference here refers to. So this would be like any list that you're sending to, you could include as a recipient list for list emails. And we're going to dive into that a little bit later, the kind of static list versus dynamic list. But for the purposes of this slide, it's just whoever is included on this email send. All right, so a couple of other awesome features that intersect with email that you may have already touched on a bit. Pardot has some great tools for personalization that can be used in email. So variable tags are sort of like the equivalent of merge fields in Word, where you can put any prospect or account level field, you can insert that into an email. If you are using something like first name, you can also set a fallback value. So if there's a missing, if it's blank for a prospect, inserting something else. So like an example for first name is we see people using like their or friend as the fallback. So if it's like, if you have a name, you can say, hi, Esha, and then launch into your message. If you don't have a name, you can say, hi there, or hi friend, or hi whoever, to make sure there's a backup value. Variable tags is something that continues to work, but in the future will be sunsetted. Pardot has a new merge language called Handlebars merge language that's going to be used as the standard across Pardot, Sales Cloud, and Marketing Cloud long-term. And I have some info on that on the next slide. But I would still expect there to be some questions about variable tags on the specialist exam. Dynamic content is available to Pardot users in the 2nd and 3rd edition of Pardot. So not the most basic tier, but some of the higher paid ones. But what it basically lets you do is show entire blocks of content that are different based on specific field values. So for example, like using job role, you could say, all right, if it's a VP title, this is the headline that we want to show them. If it's a director title, this is what we want to show them. And then similar to with variable tags, you can set a fallback value. So if that's blank, they're shown something specific. And dynamic content can be used across all of your assets. So forums, landing pages, emails. You can actually use it also on your website. Handlebars merge language, as I mentioned, is the new personalization language that's replacing variable tags. And it lets you get a little bit more granular with like if-else types of statements to personalize larger blocks of content. All right, and then when you're setting up an email template, another thing you can specify is where that template is available to be used. So one-to-one emails would be emails sent through Salesforce Engage or sent using some of Pardot's inbox plugins. Autoresponders would be things that are triggered by automations. So an automation rule or a form being submitted. List emails would be those one-off sends that we talked about. And then engagement program emails would be ones that would fall into that drip framework that Pardot has. All right, and then another feature of Pardot that's really, really nice is they have a rendering tool where when you click it, it creates a preview of what that email looks like on most major browsers and devices. So like what it would look like on a desktop, what it would look like on an iPhone, and lets you preview your message in several different ways. I'm gonna actually see really quick if I have a screenshot of that I can share with you. But this feature is powered by a tool called Litmus, and it's available in the top 2 tiers of Pardot. Give me just 1 second to see if I can find. Yeah, here we go. Okay, so here is an example. So this is what it would look like. So again, it's basically just generating a preview of like all these browsers, all these email clients. You can click in and see a subject line preview, which I don't think I have a screenshot of that one, but yeah, I do here. So what it would look like coming through in the user's inbox, how your pre-header text would show up. And then it also does a analysis across all major spam filters. So looking to see if it would pass and get through their default settings, and then if it has any recommendations on what to change, it would show that here. And common recommendations would be things like removing excess images, removing like spammy words like free or like buy now, reducing numbers of links, and among a few other things. Yep, and there's a question in the chat about can we do rendering tests with test lists? And yes, you absolutely can. So as Rinkia mentioned, this is done when you're setting up the email template or you're setting up a list email. So you can run the rendering test in one tab, and then on the next step, it'll prompt you to send the test lists. And I'll actually just pop into Pardot to show you the workflow of how that would happen. To make sure we're all on the same page. Let's do. Okay, so this is a draft list email for my blog, Spot for Pardot. So clicking into the testing tab, this is where you click to kick off that render process. And then you can go ahead and send to test lists or send to type your own individual email and then send it to yourself. And just click this and fires off. Those settings that we just reviewed about, actually, no, sorry, this is a list email. But right here under basic info is where you'd click to, on an email template, you could change the name, you could change where that template is made available. And on the list email, you can change things like what folder it's in, what campaign it's associated with, and if you want to send that as operational, or if you want to enable an A/B test. All right, let's pop back into the deck. Okay, yep, and so here are some of the screenshots that I mentioned. Okay, so best practices for building out email templates. Common sections that we see, so creating a header graphic, so like a company's logo or a banner image that you want to put at the top of things, and then the main kind of content and body copy. So this is where like most of your text would go. You'd want to have a strong headline there, and then call to actions are basically whatever you want the person to do after they read your email. So it could be contact sales, request a demo, download a brochure. And in general, in marketing emails, we'd recommend creating a button for that so that it's like visually present, or maybe doing a link in a different color. Other things that are frequently included would be like social icons for people to share with their networks. And then also a link to manage preferences or unsubscribe from an email. And Pardot does require that you include those unsubscribe links in everything that's not an operational email. So any marketing emails. Other kind of tips for building templates, definitely testing on mobile devices because a lot of users clearly are interacting with those from their phones. Pardot also gives you the ability to decide what sections can be edited, moved around, repeated. And if you're using Salesforce Engage, which is a tool that allows your sales reps to kind of send their own mini campaigns, one thing that's really cool is you can lock down certain sections. So if you wanted to say, okay, the banner is not, we can't allow sales to edit that. We're not going to allow sales to edit the unsubscribe section or the footer, but we will allow them to customize the headline if that's something we want them to be able to change. You can specify those all in the Pardot email template. And then in general, like for usability, if you're making a template for someone else to use, Watching somebody use your template is often an enlightening experience. And then definitely testing as much as possible. So sending to yourself, running the renders, sending it to somebody else, and making sure that everything's in a good spot. Okay, so let's talk about the sending process. And I'm actually going to flip back over to Pardot for this part because I think it will make more sense. So this is the sending tab. So the couple of things that need to be specified. So you can select one or more lists that you want to send the email to. And then you can also apply what are called suppression lists, which is anyone you specifically do not want to send to. So if somebody's on the recipient list, but they're on the suppression list, they will be removed. So an example that I use on my blog newsletter is I send it and then 24 to 48 hours later, I resend it to anybody who didn't open it the first time. So in this case, if I were resending this, I'd want to suppress anybody who opened the first email. You can also specify who the email is sent from. So it can be a general user where you key in the name and key in the email address. A specific user, which lets you pick from all of the users that you have set up in Pardot. Assigned user, which is their contact owner or lead owner. You can also send from the account owner in Salesforce, or if you have a custom field on the prospect that has a lookup to a user. So like one thing we see often is like the contact owner will be the sales rep, but then there will be custom fields for account manager, customer service rep, that type of thing. And so you could send from any of those users if they're in a custom field. Last couple things you'd set up on the screen, which I have some slides to talk through in a moment. You specify the subject line here, and you can also, fun fact, insert emojis. This was a thing that came out maybe a year ago. And the emojis that Pardot has here, it's not the most diverse selection of them, but these are the ones that have been tested and work in almost every email client currently. Okay, let's pop back over here. So there we go. These are the notes on basically what we just talked through. So recipient list is who's getting it, suppression list is who's not getting it, and then these are the different sender options. All right, so looking at the reporting that's available through emails. So once the email is sent out, you can review this report of overall results. So looking at the delivery rate, which is how many got through to people's inboxes successfully, the open rate, and then click to open ratio is the percentage of people who opened it that actually clicked through. All of these data points in this report that you see here are clickable. So if you wanted to see, okay, whose email bounced and didn't receive it, you could click in and you could see those prospects' names. You can also, on this second tab here, click-through rate report, you can pull up basically sort of like a heat map of where users actually clicked on the page. So like which ones clicked on this link, which ones clicked on this link. And then on the third tab, you can also look at just overall engagement. So it's measuring what percentage of people had the email open long enough that Pardot believes that they read it versus skimmed it or just opened it and kind of like moved on to the next thing. You can also get counts of how many times it was forwarded and how many times it was printed, which it always surprises me that people continue to print emails, but continues to be an ongoing phenomenon. We can also look at email clients and a breakdown of where people are interacting with this email. This is really great to use if you are like considering a redesign or considering using something like GIFs in emails, which are only supported in certain clients. So knowing that like a large portion of your users are Gmail, you would design like with that audience in mind first. It looks like oops, sorry. I see some questions here that I missed. Yeah, so question about advanced scripting language or programming languages for customization of emails. Handlebar's merge language is about as advanced as it gets on the Pardot side. Yep, in normal HTML and CSS for like ongoing updates. Concept of exclusion lists. So exclusion lists is what they're called in Marketing Cloud. Pardot calls them suppression lists. I think at some point they'll probably standardize that terminology so it's a little more straightforward. Yep, and when you send a test email to an individual email address, the view online doesn't work, that's correct. The details of that I'm a little hazy on. I know that when you send it to an actual test list, it's going out through Marketing Cloud servers and it's actually being sent like a real email, whereas the test is when you just key it in and send it to yourself. That's going out through Pardot servers and doesn't include, like any personalization would not show up in that email. Question about link aliases. I'm actually not familiar with the term link aliases. I'm assuming that is a Marketing Cloud term. Does anyone want to try? Could you clarify what you guys are looking for with the link alias question? Well, we can circle back on that one, but oh, okay. Like if you have the same, gotcha. Okay, so that's a great question. So let me go back to this report here. Hold on. So if the same link is used multiple times in the same email, it will track. Pardot will only track that link by like the whole link. So in our blog emails, we have a read more link after all of our blogs, and then the image is also linked to the blog. And so in Pardot's reporting, those clicks are one and the same. So the rate is 10% because 10% of people clicked on one or more of these things. If you want to report on which specific one they clicked, image versus the actual text link, what we have to do there is Pardot has a feature called custom redirects where you, to Prashant's point, you're basically assigning a name to that link. So saying like qualified image link, qualified text link, and then you'd get a unique URL that you could put into those emails. It's a bit tedious to do. So we've done that a couple of times in our blog emails just to get data on what people are most likely to click on. But in most cases, unless there's a strong reason why we need to know exactly what was clicked, we just let Pardot do its thing and track the whole link overall. It's a great question. All right, I'm not going to read this slide to you guys because it's very word heavy and long, but this is the kind of the full breakdown of every data point that Pardot measures. So total sent, like total number of emails sent, total queued is emails that are scheduled to go out. Soft bounces are things that didn't make it through to people's inbox for a reason that wasn't permanent. Hard bounces are emails that permanently are undeliverable. And yeah, I'll let you guys read through this at a later date, but these are the specific metrics that are tracked. And also I'll just pull up a sample of that. So for list email statistics, this is what it would look like in Pardot. And we can customize the headers that are shown here. So if I wanted to see bounces, or if I wanted to filter this in some way, so like things that were sent in a particular date range or that had a particular like success threshold, and all of that can be viewed here. So actually that's not a good example. Let's use so like here's an example of that report that we just walked through, and the link click records right here. and then those tabs that we discussed. So that would all be tabbed through right here. Yeah, and total queued, so right here, so this number would update basically as these were getting sent. So when you first hit send on the email, like all 1786 of these would be in the queued column or the queued section. And then as those went out, this number would flip. All right, and then you can also get reports at the email template level. This view is a lot less detailed than the list send view, but you can pull like emails sent, emails delivered, opens, and there are additional data points that are available on email templates, but to get anything else, you have to do a CSV export for it to show like open rate and unique click-through rate and things like that. All right, let's pop back into the deck. Okay, email preference centers. So as I mentioned, Pardot does require you to include either an unsubscribe link or a preference management link in your emails. So that if people don't want to get the messages that you're sending them, they can let you know that. We generally recommend using an email preference center over an unsubscribe page because a lot of spam filters and like internal like email hygiene systems they'll automatically go through and click every link in an email. So if your unsubscribe link is a one click to unsubscribe, you can have spam filters that are basically opting your users out without the user even taking any action. So having an email preference center where there's a next step on the page is highly, highly recommended. The default email preference page that Pardot has is completely unstyled. It's just gray text on a white background. So taking the time to set it up where you're adding the company's branding, company's logo, and then adding the specific list that they can opt in and out of is something that's worth the time to do. All right. Yep, we just talked about this. Yeah, this is what the default looks like. It's not the most attractive. And then this is an example of like a styled email preference center. So you can add different recipient lists. You can still include the ability to opt out from all communications. And you can make this as simple or as complex as you want it to be. So a couple of like practice questions. What would an administrator use to send a single email to a list of prospects? That would be a list email. What needs to be created in order to send an autoresponder? So for any automations, engagement studio programs, autoresponders, those always will be email templates. What does Pardot use to track HTML email opens? We didn't talk through this one in a ton of detail, but the answer on this is that a tracking pixel loads when images are downloaded. I don't think that's a question on the exam though, but some fun fact. And then when using the advanced subject line composer, which was the thing that we clicked into in the sending workflow, different things you can use to personalize an email subject lines. Actually, I think this question is not worded very well. Let's go back and pull that up. Okay, so this is the advanced subject composer. And we can insert emojis. We can insert merge fields. So this is handlebars merge language. If we didn't have this enabled for the account, it would pull up variable tags. And then here we can also insert dynamic content blocks. I would say inserting dynamic content in the subject line is pretty uncommon. but it's an option. All right. Yeah, so this, I guess, would be the answer here. All right, let's move on to completion actions. So this kind of, hold on, I lost the chat window. There we go. This intersects with some of the lead management and automation things that Jen Kazin went through with you guys. But completion actions work on emails, but also work on other Pardot assets. So forms, form handlers, page actions, custom redirects. And basically what it does, what a completion action is when somebody takes the action that you wanted them to take, you can queue off any type of automation. So let me pull up an example right here. So this is the section for setting the completion actions in emails. And you can say, okay, when somebody opens this email, I want to do any of these things. So common ones for email would be things like adding somebody to a Salesforce campaign with the status of opened or clicked, adjusting scores, assigning to specific users or notifying a specific user, updating field values, adding people or removing them from lists. If you use the Twilio integration, which is they do like voice and SMS services, you can have the Twilio integration call the person that's assigned to this individual. Adding and removing tags, updating the profile, or setting a source campaign. And all of these range of actions are available on form submits, email actions, and a number of other spots in Pardot. An important thing to note is that it's not retroactive. So if you went back and if you added a completion action to a form that multiple people had already filled out, it will only apply going forward, not to anybody in the past. And it also takes place every time the action occurs. So if somebody's filling out a form over and over, that action will be queued every single time. All right, let's keep moving through this. I'm gonna skip that one. All right, list management. We're gonna dive into types of lists, different ways of adding and removing prospects from lists, and then get a little bit deeper into the suppression list concept that we talked about. All right, so some key terminology with lists, and I'm gonna walk through this and then I'll demo it in the org. But static lists are basically how most lists operate, like a grocery list, where you'd add things, you can you can remove things, but it's just a list. Like it has to be populated, it has to be edited. Whereas dynamic lists are, you set the rule criteria and then the list automatically updates. So similar to a Salesforce report, it would add and remove people as the criteria is met. A couple of other optional list settings. If you make a list public, that means it's available to include in email preference centers. If you set it, well, you don't need to specify that it's a suppression list, but suppression lists can be static or dynamic, and again, used to remove people from email sends. And then test lists would be available for email testing only, not an actual send of a list email. And I see a question here in the chat of when there's multiple business units in Pardot, can we share these lists across? The answer to that right now is no. That is something that's on the roadmap for them to do long term, but currently if you want a prospect to exist in multiple business units, you'd have to have 2 contact records in Salesforce and have 1 syncing to each business unit, which isn't a great process, but they're working on improving that. All right, so let's pop over to walk through example of creating a list. So when you go through to set it up, like most things in Pardot, it will prompt you to enter a name and a folder, and then basically give you little checkboxes to select those options that we just talked about. So if you wanted it to be a static list, you wouldn't check anything here, but if you wanted it to be dynamic, we'd click this here. And then this brings you to the interface where you can set your role criteria. Pop back over to the deck. Oops. And a few other just quick notes on test lists. So you can include up to 100 people on your test list. Usually they're internal recipients, people you want to have proof the email before it goes out. And because it's for internal use only, you can't make it dynamic or make it visible in the CRM or make it visible in your subscription center. And then emails that are sent to the test lists are still tracked like normal Pardot emails. So if you're sending to your marketing manager in their prospect activity history, you would see those test emails show up along with regular list emails and automated email sends. And then included some screenshots here just so you guys have this as a reference later on. But yeah, unselected, this remains static. If you check it, it becomes a dynamic list. This archive date is, I honestly don't find it that useful, but it's like you can filter by like things that are past our archive dates or not. I don't see this used very well overall. Public list, again, is making that available in the preference center. And then you can set a label and a description that would show up in the preference center. And then like this is a sample of how that would appear in the pref center. And then last one here is CRM visible. So if you have the prospect lists section put on the contact and lead page layouts in Salesforce, this checkbox would allow you to add and remove people from that list in Salesforce, which is really handy if you're asking sales to help like pick what types of communications people are getting sent. There's a question about if someone unsubscribes to your newsletter, is there any way that they can resubscribe to it? Yes, there are a couple of different options for how we can do this. So in one of the recent releases, they came out with like a resubscribe process. You can also, depending on the specific, like what exactly you're looking to, how you want the workflow to work. A couple of other options are like you could have just have somebody manually opt them back in Salesforce or in Pardot. Or there's kind of a hacky workaround where you can have them fill out a form and there's a hidden field for that email opt-out that basically unchecks it when they fill out the form. But the short answer to that question is yes, there is a way to do that. I think we already talked through most of these items here on dynamic lists, but some links included as a reference. And as I mentioned, it's like an automation rule or a Salesforce report where it's continuously running and adding and removing people from lists. And then when you're creating your dynamic list, you can, the first thing you'll have to decide is, do you want it to be, all the criteria to be and or? So match all means you need to meet all the criteria to be included in the list, and then match any is like the or equivalent. You can also use things called rule groups to do subgroupings. So you could, like if you wanted to say prospect state is Nebraska or Wisconsin, you could set those as like a sub rule criteria here. I see a question in the chat about, is the presentation can be shared? And yes, I'll share this after this call. Just to give you a feel for the types of things that are included. I'm going to pull up this here. So almost anything that's available in Salesforce you can reference when you're setting a dynamic list. So membership in a campaign, campaign member status, the status of like what they are in Salesforce. So if it's contact or lead, any account fields, prospect fields, who it's assigned to, actions they've taken. So like email opens, clicks, form views, submissions. You can look at things on the opportunity. If you have a custom object set up, we can also reference custom object data. We can look at scores, and then prospect time is kind of an interesting one. So you can look at how long ago they were created, how long ago their last activity was. You can also look at how many times a prospect has been emailed in a set period. So we frequently see this one used as a suppression list, where if you want to say if the prospect has been emailed at least one time in the last like 48 hours, you can specify this here. So like excluding people who have been recently emailed from further communications. Okay, other kind of FYIs and considerations about dynamic lists. If you use a dynamic list in a scheduled email send, the email is, the list criteria that's used is the actual moment that the email is sent. So if I had a dynamic list with 10 people on it today, and I schedule an email to go out on Sunday, and by that time, 5 people have no longer meet the criteria to be included on that list, it's going to look at on Sunday, there's 5 people on the list, that's who's getting it. If dynamic lists are used in an engagement program, and somebody falls off of the list, they are pulled out of the Engagement Studio program. If they rejoin the list, they'll pick up back where they left off, basically. And dynamic lists this is a common misconception about dynamic lists. You can also make these public and include them in email preference centers, and people can opt themselves in and out of dynamic lists. But what happens is they're still visibly shown on the list, but then they have an opt-in status of no for that particular list. Question in the chat about, is there an option for auto suppression in Pardot? What I'm thinking that's probably referring to is like specifying like, I don't want any of these domains to get emails from us ever, or something like that. And one thing I've seen people do for that is create an automation rule where it's looking for email addresses that contain certain values and then just automatically marking those as do not email. But if there was like a hand-picked list of people that you wanted to suppress from everything, going through and checking that do not email box for them would be the best way to do that. All right, ways to create lists. So this is just like a laundry list of different ways that lists can be created. So if you already have an existing list, you can create a split of those. So if you wanted to test 2 different groups, you can specify names for the new lists and what percentage of the original list you want to add to those. You can create lists through automation rules. So adding people to a particular list when they meet a set of criteria. Segmentation rules, which I think you may have touched on with Jen also. Similarly, this would run one time versus automation rules, which run continuously, but it would add people to a list if they met that criteria. Completion actions, which we talked about. So if somebody does whatever the call to action is, clicks a link, opens an email, you can add them to a list. Table action, so from your all prospects view, you can check off people that you want to be included and then use this little action thing at the bottom to add them to a particular list. And then another common one is through an import. So grabbing a CSV file, uploading it, and creating a list at that point. Another one that kind of falls into just dynamic list functionality overall is like adding people to a Salesforce campaign. You can have a dynamic list that's looking for members of that campaign. and that kind of gives you a way of like allowing people to take care of it from Salesforce, but then getting that data in Pardot. More details on suppression lists. So again, this is about excluding a certain group of people from the list, the email that's being sent. Frequent ones that we see are like prospects that are actively engaged by sales, wanting to remove them from marketing activity, like suppressing people who have already taken the action that you want them to take, or from doing it again. And then also that use case that I just mentioned about email fatigue. So if they've been emailed X number of times in X number of days, removing them from that. All right, and then test lists, a couple just notes and gotchas on that. If you're sending to internal people that you want to include on a test list, they do have to be created as prospects. There's also a way, so from the user's view in Pardot, you can check people off similar to the table action that we just reviewed, and add them to the test list from this view. All right, do not email versus opt-out fields. I'm not sure if you guys would have touched on this one before, but Pardot has two fields that control kind of overall mailable status. So if an email hard bounces, which means it was sent, it couldn't be delivered, and the message that was returned indicated that it's a permanent failure, so like this user's account does not exist, would be a hard bounce. Soft bounce would be something that's, it wasn't delivered, but it could be changed in the future. So things like the server being too busy, or yeah, there's a huge number of reasons that soft bounces take place. Once that happens 5 times, they'll be marked as do not email in prospect or in Pardot. And then opted out applies when the user or recipient takes some kind of action. And when the opt-out field is checked, they're automatically marked as do not email. So if you import a list and indicate that they need to be opted out, both of these will get ticked. If your user clicks the opt-out link themselves, both of these get ticked. Spam complaints do the same thing, or you can manually mark them as opted out from Salesforce or from Pardot. A couple of practice questions for the exam. So types of lists that can be used as suppression lists on email sends. Dynamic lists can be used as suppressions. Test lists cannot. Static lists can also be used as suppressions. And public lists technically can be used as suppressions, but that's a quality of a dynamic or a static list. Question about an opt-down feature in Pardot. I'm not sure what that is referring to. I'm guessing that's another Marketing Cloud thing that I'm not aware of. Could you, if you could elaborate on what that functionality is, I can weigh in on that. But question 2, difference between a dynamic list and a static list. The choices here, you can't manually update list memberships of a dynamic list, but you can manually update the membership of a static list. That's the winner on this one. And then test lists, options for setting those up. Are they dynamic, static, CRM visible, or public? The answer to that one is static. All right, and then just a couple of overall email best practices. Deliverability and reputation management is super, super important for email marketing as a whole. Trying to get through to people's inboxes is hard, and there's a lot of moving parts with it. So making sure that your clients, or you, if you're using Pardot, are very careful and very strict about adhering to Pardot's permission-based marketing policy is highly recommended. Just a couple of quick notes here to keep in mind about reputation management. So the way people engage with your emails matters. So if your users are frequently opening it, frequently clicking it, that's a tick in the positive column. But if customers are pressing the spam button or telling their email providers that they don't want your messages for whatever reason, that will hurt your sending reputation. Most email applications have some kind of algorithm to determine like what goes through the inbox, what goes through promotions, what goes to junk, and what's outright rejected. And they vary between email provider. For most subscribers, ISPs, they have a way of remembering like the URLs that are routinely sending spam. So even one like bad email can reflect poorly on the rest of your future sends. And then there are things called spam traps, which are basically fake email addresses that are owned by ISPs to try to trick people into sending to them and noting that it's spam. We also see this happening with lists that are purchased where like sometimes they'll have a rule that like, okay, this list can only be used for 3 sends, and they'll include a couple of fake email addresses there. So if you send it the 4th time, they know that you're not complying with the terms of your agreement. Pardot's permission-based marketing policy basically says you have to have opt-in consent from anybody that you are sending to. Other relevant laws, CAN-SPAM is the one in the US that governs email sending. And then GDPR is the one that affects everyone in the EU. I would expect that there won't be questions on this on the exam, but just knowing the names of those regulations is advisable. So purchasing lists is explicitly against Pardot's permission-based policy. And in general, the people that are on that list, if they don't already know you, they're not likely to be engaged. So finding other ways of growing your list in a healthier way are recommended. A couple of other like study tips and miscellaneous resources I wanted to share. This won't be on the exam, but this is a list of apps and tools that work really well with Pardot and can extend the power of how Pardot operates. So Qualified is a chatbot and does conversational marketing. Drift is similar to Qualified with that regard, but a little bit of a different focus. SiftRock is a tool that was acquired by Drift that does email reply management. So like if you're getting messages returned that say like this or this person is no longer with the company, SiftRock can automatically update Pardot with that information. FeedOtter is an email, is a plugin that can pull data into Pardot through RSS. So like creating we frequently see this used on email newsletters to streamline the process of creating those. And then this is a roundup of some data enrichment and data cleansing vendors that we found pretty useful. Get feedback for surveys. Cruise Your Data is a tool that someone on my team built that makes it easier to build really complicated dynamic lists. Bulletproof email buttons are like email buttons that are converted into essentially little tables that you can insert into your emails that improve the way that those are displayed in the inbox. Form Style Generator, this is an awesome resource from Jenna Mulvey to help make that process smoother. Eventable generates add to calendar buttons that you can insert in your emails. And then this automated opportunity contact roles. This is more of for a reporting function, but it's a product that my company built that's on the App Exchange. Other kind of community connections that you can lean on as you study for the exam. So events, obviously, fortunately not a whole lot in person these days, but great resources in the online community. A couple of my favorite blogs are listed here, and then some practice exams and some certification resources. There's a question in the chat about governance limit for number of subscribers in a list, static or dynamic. There is no limit on that. And then my company has a couple of paid training courses. I've included links here if you want to check them out, and a discount code if any of those catch your eye. But that was pretty much all I had to cover with you guys. if there are any other questions, please drop those in the chat. And yes, I will definitely share this deck right away for you guys. Going once, twice for questions. All right, awesome. Well, thank you guys for the time. Appreciate you joining for this. And yeah, if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to tweet at me. I'm pretty active on Twitter. And yeah, we'll share the deck, the links, and the recording. Great. Thank you guys.
Thanks, Andrea. That was a wonderful session. And I guess our trailblazers enjoyed a lot with your continuous answers from the chat window. That was brilliant and great expertise out there. Guys, do check out the community slide as well that consists of all the links that will definitely help you out not only for email marketing, but for your overall exam. And thanks again for your time. That was a wonderful session out there. Stay tuned, guys. We have 2 more days for our boot camp, day 5 and day 6. Tomorrow, Christina would be there for Pardot forms, form handlers, and landing pages. Stay tuned for more amazing content. Thanks again, Andrea, for your time. It was really wonderful to have you there. We look forward for more networking in future.